we're now going to shift to a national story, the UK story, with our next fireside chat actually is going to be moderated by Akshat Rathi, who is an excellent senior climate reporter at Bloomberg News, where he hosts an extremely popular podcast called Zero, and if you haven't listened to it, I would encourage you all to listen to it. And he's going to be talking to a man who has one of the toughest jobs in the UK, also one of the best job titles. Chris Stark is head of mission control in the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, where he's leading the UK government's effort to achieve clean power by 2030. Before that, Chris headed the Climate Change Committee, the statutory group set up to monitor the government's climate efforts, and in between, he was, in fact, briefly Chief Executive of the Carbon Trust before the Starmer government came knocking and invited him to take up his current role. So please join me in welcoming Akshat and Chris to the stage.
Hi.
How are you?
Good, how are you? Thank you for that introduction, Palita, and welcome to the forum and welcome to the Zero podcast again, Chris.
It's nice to be back with you again, Asha.
Now, let's start with the big picture before we get to the goals that you are going to have to achieve while you're working for the government. We spoke about a year ago, and you at that time told me that the climate consensus in the UK cannot be taken for granted. Since then, Donald Trump is back in the White House. The typically climate-forward Labour government has been, at times, deprioritizing decarbonization. So, would it be fair to say that now the climate consensus globally cannot be taken for granted? And what should climate-forward leaders like you and many of those in the audience be doing at this time?
So I stand by my comments to you a year ago. It's amazing that's only a year, actually. That's incredible. It's been quite a year. The climate consensus is not something you should ever take for granted. And the best example of that is that in the last year we've seen some of the most extreme weather events that we've ever seen, probably the most extreme year ever in terms of recorded history. But it doesn't connect automatically to a desire globally, at least from our politicians globally, to do more on climate mitigation. Interesting question whether it might lead to more of a focus on climate adaptation and resilience. I rather suspect it will, although I suspect we'll probably end up calling it something else. But I sort of feel I want to challenge some things that you said. I mean, I do think we are a climate-forward government here in the UK, and the difference, I suppose, is that we are not in the world of setting new targets only, that we actually want to demonstrate that you can deliver against those targets. So the reason I do this job is because fundamentally, having been the person that advised on the targets for the country for the last, well, I've been at this now for more than 10 years. If someone offers you the chance to come in and help deliver them, I feel you've got to sort of take that up. So the clean power bit of this is just stage one, right? It's sort of base camp. And once we're at base camp, we can start ascending the mountain. But that mountain is going to be largely driven by electrifying our economy, as I'm sure we'll discuss in this discussion. But cleaning up the power system early is, I think, the very best way for us to demonstrate that as a government, we are even more committed to our climate objectives because we're focused now on delivering them.
So the clean power mission, and let's define it because it's 95% clean power and 5% unabated gas. It's been more than 6 months since you started. One of the important pieces of advice I ever got at the start of my career from my line manager was that, take 6 months to understand the job, but by the end of it, you should know what you're doing. So, how confident are you?
That's good advice.
How confident are you that the UK can reach the clean power goal by 2030? And what have you done so far to reach that conclusion?
So I am confident. I mean, I'm not recklessly confident, but I am confident because I think I want to just make this point that what we have committed to do is really right on the edge of what we think is possible. So I acknowledge that. we call it a mission for a reason. It is an actual mission. And just to make the point that, governments can have a few missions, they can't have hundreds. And I think it is really important that we've selected this one as something that has the support of the whole government, right up to the Prime Minister. I'd say it also has the support of other parts of government in the UK as well, including notably our devolved governments. You're right to define it. So what have we done in the first 6 months? We have not wasted, I feel, I'm coming up for 7 months now, I don't feel I've wasted a single day in that time, even over Christmas. We have moved lightning fast to try and define what we mean quickly, and then move into quite an exciting period where we also define the policies that we think will be needed to deliver it, to allow me to start this year moving into genuine delivery mode. Now, let me just briefly cover those things. So the challenge of clean power, the reason I do this job is because when I was at the Climate Change Committee, I spent a very happy period of my life working with some of the world's best analysts, looking at how you could decarbonize a whole economy by 2050. The last time we did this was for the 6th carbon budget assessment. We're about to see the CCC's 7th carbon budget assessment. I'll be a keen reader of that when it comes. But last time round, we did something that I don't expect the CCC to do this time, which is we did 5 different scenarios, all of them complete scenarios with integrity within them. And they're all very different by design, because it was the first time the country had a net zero target. We wanted to demonstrate there was more than one way to skin a cat. So we looked at 5 different ways to hit that goal. One thing you can do when you've done something like that is look across the 5, and you can see there's some common factors to those scenarios, quite a few actually common factors. One of them is that there is a point when you can say you've got a clean power system, but the second point to that is that you shouldn't be overly purist about what that means. So the kind of fundamental of what we're trying to do in the UK is based on that analysis, and we've basically asked our energy system operator, it's called NESO in the UK, to give us their view of how you fulfill a target like that. Basically, in a world where we expect to have gas in the power system, right? So we are in a very unique moment where we can use gas as a backup, flexible backup, and progressively reduce the amount of gas that we're burning each year in the power system to the point where by 2030, end of 2030, I'm going to take the whole year, but by the end of 2030, we might need it, we can get that belief 5% in that year. And I've called that Herculean. I stand by that. That was what I said before I came into this job, and it's that sort of effort that you need to make it happen. Now, we should talk about all the things that need to be done to do that, but we defined that quickly and then produced an action plan around that, and here we are at the start of the year now implementing it.
So the action plan is detailed. It's available for anybody to read. There are some big numbers in there. There's 2 times as much onshore wind that needs to be built by 2030, 3 times as much solar, lots more energy storage, a lot more transmission, 5 times as much flexibility on the grid on the demand side, which we should talk about. But the main thing you take from it is that you're going to have to build for a rapidly changing system. And that means it's going to be expensive. The estimate is about £200 billion of investment going towards the mission, towards decarbonizing the grid, but also expanding the grid. And given the financial pressures that the government is facing, how do you think that investment can be secured, and how much of that will the government be on the hook for?
So let me, again, challenge a word that you used. Expensive is a word that's doing a lot of heavy lifting in that question, and I don't regard it as expensive. So let me briefly explain why I think that. We need to get ourselves, what are we trying to do here? Yes, I'm trying to clean up the power system, and it's tremendously important that we do that. But I think even more importantly than that, we are preparing for a period after 2030 when we're going to need to seriously grow the power system, because we expect the end use of transport uses and the industrial uses and domestic heating and cooling to become electric. And we're in a period now where the demand for electricity before 2030 is probably fairly flat. So if you can clean up the power system quickly, you will be in the right place to then grow the power system after that. So that expense, as you called it, is basically a down payment on that. We are investing in a clean power system that we know we're going to need into the 2030s. Now, the mission to 2030 is an enormous challenge. We've got another one after that, hopefully at a more measured pace, to grow the power system probably by 50%, possibly even more than that, might even double by 2050. So we are basically getting ahead of that by encouraging that investment. Now, that 200 billion you referred to is what happens if you roll up the investments in storage, in generation, and in networks that we think we need for 2030. That prepares us. And that is not a cost directly to the consumer, at least not initially. So we will recover those costs from the consumer or from the taxpayer, these are choices, over a very long period. So we're in a moment where, if you walk with me on this, we can get the investment done early. We can benefit in terms of the benefit to the economy from that investment. We buy ourselves an enormous amount of additional energy security with that investment. And the costs to the consumer come after that over a very long period, matched against a reduction in the cost from not burning fossil fuels in the power system. So if we play our cards right, bring that all together, we get an enormous economic return, we get a huge climate benefit, we get energy security, and we don't have that cost to the consumer that lots of people worry about. And I am confident that can be done. I'm also confident that the kind of power system you get at the end of that, with long-term contracts for renewables particularly, brings down what we call the wholesale price of electricity. And translating that into a lower cost for the consumer is a really nice challenge to have, I think.
So Clean Power Mission obviously says on the tin what you're doing. But if you read the announcement, it's Clean Power Mission with cheaper electricity prices, right? It's not just about decarbonization, it's about lowering electricity prices. And now we've seen in elections around the world that when governments don't address these pocketbook issues around energy prices, they get booted out. In my own analysis, I have not seen a single country where there is high electricity prices and high electrification rate or just the absolute amount. And so, isn't there a risk in the plan that you've laid out, which is going to require you to build a lot more gas power plants as a way of managing the intermittency that comes with renewables? Of course, there's storage that will be included. But isn't there a risk with even more gas power plants, even if the reliance on gas is going down, that the prices of electricity may rise? The UK has among the highest electricity prices already. They could become costlier. How will you deal with that scenario?
So I am sure we can bring down costs to the consumer. I don't know exactly what the price of electricity will be in 2030 because a lot of it is so dependent on globally traded gas. And actually that's the secret here, is that at the moment, even though we have very extensive power system, renewables power system, gas sets the price very often in the wholesale market. And that price of gas in the last few years has been at historic high, quite astonishing levels over the last 2 or 3 years. And it continues to be the reason why electricity prices are high in this country. I don't know what's going to happen to the gas price. If the gas price fell, so too would electricity prices. But in a sense, I don't want to be wedded to that uncertainty any longer. So there's sort of two aspects to the energy security point, I think. One is the actual energy security that comes from having sort of homegrown power, especially from renewables, also some nuclear in there with storage. That idea of being more self-sufficient, if I could put it that way, and less dependent on those global markets is one aspect of energy security. The other one is the energy insecurity that comes to the consumer from the requirement to be on this, a very unpredictable gas price roller coaster. And we buy ourselves quite a lot of insurance by doing what we're trying to do with the clean power goal. And the crucial point is that if you want to displace gas, you've got sort of two things to do. One is to build out more of those long-term renewable contracts and clean power contracts that we will sign over the next few years and reduce the points over the course of the year when gas sets the price. And that's essentially what we're doing. And the other thing that we can do is bring on a set of technologies that provide a similar service to a gas-fired power station when you need it. And they are typically the sort of low-carbon flex that you need in the power system, or long-duration energy storage technologies. So those moments when you absolutely have to turn to gas at the moment, the reason we are able to accommodate renewables is because we have that gas fleet. We also could do with moving to a new set of technologies that sort of displace the market power of gas at that moment. And we will do that too. So there's lots of reasons to think that the consumer price can come down, but you've got to deploy these things at scale quickly to see that happen. And that 200 billion that you referred to is about north of 40 billion pounds of capex each year between now and the end of 2030, is the investment in that grid that supports that and those technologies. And that is the secret. Now, let me just agree with the premise of the question. You're absolutely right to say that our success depends not just on building stuff, but also on the consumer seeing the benefit of that. I think there's a broader story beyond just consumer prices about the economy and people in the communities hosting infrastructure seeing some benefit from that too. And you might extend that into the sort of public consent for these things. These are the things that keep me awake at night. So I'm restless to get that sorted. Those consumer issues, I would really like to see us move to where we were seeing the electricity price in particular come down, because the rest of the story on decarbonisation rests on a cheaper electricity price ultimately. If you want people to take a heat pump, if you want people to move to electric car, if you want industries to move to electrified technologies, the best possible policy is a cheaper electricity price.
In trying to get to cheaper electricity prices, one thing that you have to do a lot of is to build transmission.
Yeah.
So that you are not paying to shut down wind power in the north when there is demand in the south. Last year, those payments added up to 1.8 billion pounds from the grid operator just to shut wind power in the north down. But there is a lot of opposition to transmission, just to building in general. How do you maintain support for the transition and for building when people are not willing to allow for building, or there's anger being stoked to try and stop transmission from being built?
So a few things on this. The first thing is we've got to do genuine consultation with those communities. So, I mean, this is not a plan that will ride roughshod over those communities. But there are going to be some difficult decisions ahead about location of infrastructure. So I don't think I can duck that. I would say, though, as a country, as a whole, what holds us back is the fact that we haven't built stuff quickly enough. So my feeling, certainly from the 10 years plus I've been looking at this, is that there's a frustration commonly expressed that we just haven't gone and done the job. So the sort of top line here is we're going to build things in this country, and that is the measure of success. Like the barriers to that are actually pretty extensive. They're often barriers that the government itself puts in place. Some of them are really justified, some of them less so. We need to push through those barriers and make sure that we have the minimum of delay in getting infrastructure in the right places of the country that we need. But the kind of next part of this, I suppose, is that if you buy that idea that we're going to build it, I think you've also got to take people with you on the value of doing this in the round. And that, to me, is the sort of the ultimate test of whether I'm successful or not, is whether people see the value of the power system that we're creating, either in their bills or in that energy security that I talked about. And the very final thing, I'll make it very quickly. There is a story out there, and you do read it, that we're somehow going to carpet the country in pylons and wind farms. Absolutely not true. We are not going to do that. So I think the other part of the story is bringing some rational discussion to that. It's actually quite there's actually very few parts of the country that will see development. Most of the grid investment is offshore. So I think we can do this in a way that sort of buys support, as long as we are truthful and honest and direct about what we're trying to do and the impacts it will bring.
So global electricity demand rise, as we saw, is about 3% expected to be. In countries like India and China, they've seen 7 to 10% electricity demand rise for now over 2 decades.
Yeah.
And they know how to build, and the UK does not, as you've talked about. Even if we take the public opposition out, so offshore building, for example, the north to south transmission lines that need to be built, they take about 5 years to get there. So by the time you plan for a transmission grid offshore, today, it won't be working for you, for your clean power plan by 2030. So what is the government doing to try and speed up construction when there isn't public opposition to those projects?
So we have a plan in this country that predates me doing this job, has been developed already and needs to get through the planning system in some shape or form. I'm sure there'll be changes to that plan, but they're minor. And just to make that point, this is the story I wish more people knew, and I'm going to make sure that everyone hears it. We have now a really good piece of analysis that shows us that there are 88 projects we need, network works as we call them. Some of those are lengths of cable, some of them are substations, converter stations. 88 of them, which deliver us the power system that we could build by 2030 that would be very, very clean indeed. So the sort of network that we require. Of the 88, 80 of them are essential for that 2030 target. They are already in an advanced state. So we will build those projects and support the transmission owners to get them built by 2030. And I'm confident about that because they are ready to go. And there are armies of people ready now to get going on that. So I think this is the reason I am optimistic about it, because if you can build that kind of network, connect to it the generation that we need, and do one more thing, which is where I think we are being genuinely ambitious, and some might say radical, which is to go into the queue of projects waiting to connect to the grid and actually curate it. So, connect the projects that we know are ready and which deliver us strategically what we need for 2030. Doing that kind of surgery to the grid queue with the support of NESO in this country is the other thing that we've done with that. And essentially that allows me then to bring on the generation, the storage projects that we know we can have on the system by 2030 connected to that grid that we're going to build. Now, that is a story of building it to time that we will also want to tell other countries around the world that we have done, because that will overturn decades of inertia. Which is a term you shouldn't use in the power system, but decades of delay.
Inertia in the power
we would like some inertia in the power system, definitely. But that is a brilliant story. It's a far better story to tell than the latest ambitious goal for 2050 that we're setting, because we're actually getting on with building stuff now, and that is, I think, going to need to be the challenge that every other country faces into too.
So when last year we spoke, you were heading the Climate Change Committee, you were an independent watchdog. You could look at the government and tell them what they're getting right and what they're getting wrong. Now you are in government, and Labour Party was very ambitious on climate when it was in the opposition. That messaging has certainly become mixed over the 6 months that they've been around, right? We heard from Rachel Reeves, who wants to build the third runway on Heathrow, but also expand airports around the country, which has been criticized by environmental groups. There are rumors that Starmer might not oppose the extraction of oil and gas in the North Sea at Rosebank or Jackdaw. When this government downplays the bold action that's needed on climate, doesn't that make your job harder? And how are you going to achieve your mission?
Well, I don't think as a government we are downplaying the importance of our climate objectives. And you can use the word mix, but I mean, again, I'll go back to what I said earlier. I think the challenge is to get stuff done on this. I mean, the best possible response to the critics who say that you've walked away from climate objectives is to say, no, we're actually doing it. On Heathrow, for example, there is room to manage Heathrow under a carbon budget. Ed Miliband has said just that. So we are maintaining commitment to our legal goals here. I don't doubt it becomes more challenging as you bring more emissions into one sector. You've got to work harder somewhere else. But that's the point of a carbon budget. And, I'm very sure this is a government still committed to climate. I wouldn't do this job otherwise. Funnily enough, I'm also committed to climate. I'm absolutely sure Ed Miliband is too. I think, interestingly, the Prime Minister is the other strong advocate for climate. He's had 2 very successful visits to a COP now, speaks really eloquently on the need to do all this, and I think sees the opportunity for global leadership on climate. So every decision we take as a government is measured against that, and we're ambitious, right? But mainly that ambition needs to be expressed through our desire to get stuff delivered now, I think.
So last question, a global question, because you are seeing that if you agree that the global consensus on climate cannot be taken for granted, there are certainly big economies, starting with the US, that are starting to pull away from climate commitments. So you hear noises from Argentina, from Russia, from New Zealand, of all places. There is a vacuum that is being created right now, and it's getting stronger as we go into COP30 later this year, for real leadership on climate. Do you think the UK can fill that, and how exactly?
I do think that. I don't think we can entirely fill it. And of course, I regret what's happening in other countries. I mean, the US decision to pull out of Paris is something that's, of course, we regret that. I mean, the bigger the club, the better. But you have to hope, I suppose, and I don't know if it's just, I don't know if it's a hope or a prediction, over the next period, it will be the technology that advances and the fact that the fundamental economics of the clean transition take hold. That's where I think we can show leadership. So our willingness to do difficult things, to build that infrastructure that we talked about, to stay committed to a clean power system that is going to be dominated by renewables, that's the fantastic story for us to tell. And as we build that out, I hope we're also to show the benefits of that the non-climate benefits of that system are, in a sense, where I think we deliver the most obvious leadership. We can say, we did this for lots of reasons. It happened to benefit the climate, but it brought a host of benefits beyond that to the country. And in the end, it becomes irresistible. I mean, I think we're on the bus now with these technologies. The question is only how quickly we travel. And I'm extremely happy for the UK to take a lead on that for the next few years. And I'd like to demonstrate that we're doing the right stuff, because we're going to regret it. Others will regret it if they don't follow suit.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Akshat.